The moment Padre Pio removed his vestments after Mass, he did something that most priests never think to do. And what he did in those first 15 minutes after celebrating the Holy Sacrifice determined the spiritual power that would sustain him through demonic attacks, physical suffering, and the crushing weight of thousands of confessions. You probably leave Mass and immediately check your phone, get in your car, or start talking about weekend plans. You walk out those church doors and within 60 seconds, your mind has already shifted to what's for lunch or what you need to do this afternoon. And in doing so, you're losing graces that were meant to be yours for the taking. This isn't about judgment. This is about waking you up to a reality most Catholics never learn. The 15 minutes immediately following your reception of Holy Communion represent the most spiritually potent window of your entire week. Your soul is in direct contact with the real presence of Jesus Christ. The same Jesus who created the universe is physically present within your body. And during those precious minutes, before that presence diminishes in its sacramental form, you have access to graces, spiritual power, and divine intimacy that won't be available to you again until next Sunday. Padre Pio understood this with crystalline clarity. His mystical gifts allowed him to see what most of us can only grasp through faith, that the post-communion period isn't just a nice quiet time for reflection. It's a battlefield advantage. It's a grace multiplication moment. It's when heaven is closest and hell is most threatened by your potential. So he developed 3 specific practices that he performed without fail after every single Mass he celebrated. Practices that weren't random pious customs, but strategic spiritual warfare maneuvers designed to maximize every ounce of grace available in the TT's sacred window. What you're about to learn isn't theory. These are documented historical facts about Padre Pio's actual routine, verified by the priests who lived with him, the spiritual directors who guided him, and the thousands who observed his post-Mass behavior over 50 years of public ministry. And more importantly, these practices aren't just for priests. Every single thing Padre Pio did after Mass can be adapted and applied to your life starting this Sunday. By the time you finish watching this, you'll have a complete blueprint for transforming the most wasted 15 minutes of your week into the most spiritually productive. Before Padre Pio spoke to anyone, before he removed his vestments completely, before he even left the sanctuary, he performed a specific act of spiritual protection that created an invisible shield around his priesthood. This wasn't a quick sign of the cross or a mumbled prayer. This was a deliberate, focused act of spiritual warfare that he considered absolutely non-negotiable. And here's what you need to understand. Padre Pio celebrated Mass while under constant demonic attack. The devil didn't wait politely until after the liturgy to assault him. Padre Pio walked up to him and said quietly, "You just received the King of Heaven in your soul, and now you're shouting about money. Do you understand what you've done?" The man was shaken. He had never considered that his post-Mass behavior was spiritually significant. Most Catholics haven't considered this either. You've been taught that Mass attendance fulfills your Sunday obligation. And it does. But you've never been taught that the 15 minutes after communion might be more spiritually significant than the 45 minutes of the Mass itself. Those are the minutes when you actually receive and activate what the Mass offers. And if you waste those minutes on noise, conversation, and activity, you're like someone who shows up to a feast, sits at the table, but never actually eats the food. So your 3 post-Mass practices starting this Sunday: grace-claiming prayer in the first 30 seconds after communion, 10 minutes of personal conversation with Jesus, and beginning your rosary while the real presence is still at full strength, and your 3 absolute prohibitions: no unnecessary conversation, no media engagement, no rushing into activity. You protect the post-communion window like your spiritual life depends on it, because Padre Pio proved through 50 years of mystical experience that it does. You now have the exact blueprint Padre Pio followed for 50 years. 3 simple practices that take less than 15 minutes but create spiritual momentum that lasts all week. But having the blueprint means nothing if you don't actually build. You can watch this entire video, nod along with everything, think, "That makes sense," and then change absolutely nothing about your post-Mass behavior next Sunday. And if you do that, you've wasted both your time watching this and the grace God intended to give you through this teaching. Here's what you absolutely must remember. First, the 15 minutes after communion represent the most spiritually powerful window of your entire week. Jesus is physically present within you. Your prayers carry exponential authority. The graces available in those moments exceed what's available at any other time. You don't waste this window on checking your phone or chatting about lunch plans. You guard it. You protect it. You use it for the intimate communion with Jesus that transforms your soul. Second, Padre Pio's 3 practices aren't random pious customs. They're strategic spiritual warfare maneuvers. The grace-claiming prayer ensures you receive what God is offering. The personal conversation creates intimacy with Jesus while he's most accessible. The post-communion rosary locks in those graces and creates protective spiritual momentum for your week. Each practice builds on the previous one. You don't skip steps. You don't abbreviate. You follow the pattern that sustained one of the greatest mystics in church history through decades of supernatural warfare. Third, avoiding the 3 critical mistakes is just as important as doing the 3 practices correctly. You can pray perfectly and still lose everything by immediately engaging conversation, media, or frantic activity. Silence after Mass isn't optional for deep spiritual life. It's essential. You protect the silence even when it's socially awkward, even when your family doesn't understand, even when other Catholics look at you strangely for sitting quietly instead of socializing. You protect it because Padre Pio proved that everything depends on it. The question facing you now is simple. What will you do with this knowledge? You can continue as you have been, treating Mass as a weekly checkbox and wondering why your spiritual life feels stagnant. Or you can implement what you've learned here starting this Sunday and finally experience the breakthrough you've been praying for. The graces are there. Jesus is offering them. But you have to receive them. You have to claim them. You have to cooperate with what God is trying to give you. This Sunday, when you receive communion, you're going to do things differently. You'll return to your pew, and instead of mindlessly kneeling and reciting a memorized prayer, you'll make that 30-second act of grace claiming, Lord, I receive everything you're offering me right now. Fill what my sins would leave empty. Then you'll spend 10 real minutes in honest conversation with Jesus, not formal prayer language, real talk. You'll tell him what's actually happening in your life, and you'll listen for his response in the movements of grace within your soul. Then you'll take out your rosary, and you'll begin praying, slowly, with intention, meditating on the mysteries while maintaining awareness that Jesus is present within you as you pray. You might only complete 1 decade before you need to leave church. That's fine. You started it during the window of power. When Mass ends, you won't chat with anyone unless absolutely necessary. You'll walk to your car in silence. You'll drive home with no radio, no phone. And when you get home, you'll sit quiet, lie for 15 minutes before doing anything else. You'll let the graces settle. You'll remain with Jesus in the silence. Your family might think you're being weird. Other Catholics might not understand why you're not socializing after Mass. That's okay. You're not doing this for their approval. You're doing this because Padre Pio, who bore the wounds of Christ in his own body, who battled demons face to face, who spent 50 years in intimate mystical union with God, proved that this is how you access the power of the Eucharist beyond just sacramental validity. This is how the Mass transforms your actual daily life, instead of remaining a Sunday ritual disconnected from Monday through Saturday reality. If this video helped you understand something you've been missing your entire Catholic life, share it. Post it in your parish Facebook group. Send it to Catholic family members who are struggling spiritually. Text it to friends who complain that prayer doesn't seem to work for them. The reason most Catholics never experience the power of the Mass is because nobody ever taught them what to do in the 15 minutes after communion. You now know. You have an obligation to share this knowledge with others who desperately need it. Subscribe to this channel if you want more authentic Catholic teaching rooted in scripture, tradition, and the lives of the saints. Not feel-good motivational content, but real spiritual wisdom that transforms your relationship with God. Click the notification bell so you don't miss the next video. We're going deeper into Padre Pio's mystical teachings in ways you've never heard before. Leave a comment below and tell us, what's been your biggest struggle with staying focused after receiving communion? What distracts you the most in those post-Mass minutes? Your honest answers help us create future content that addresses the real challenges Catholics face. May God bless you and keep you. May Padre Pio intercede for you. And may your faith grow deeper, your prayers more powerful, and your soul closer to heaven with each passing day. This Sunday, everything changes. You're not going to Mass the same way anymore. You're going to receive what Jesus has been trying to give you all along. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Some of his most violent encounters with demons happened within minutes of consecrating the Eucharist. So what did he do? The moment the Mass ended, while still wearing his vestments, Padre Pio would make a profound act of thanksgiving, but not the kind you're probably imagining. This wasn't a vague, "Thank you, Jesus, for this Mass" kind of prayer. This was a specific, intentional claiming of the graces he had just received through his priestly consecration of the host and his own reception of communion. He would stand there, sometimes for 3 to 5 minutes, in complete silence, his hands folded, his eyes closed, his entire being focused on acknowledging the presence still operative within him and formally accepting every grace attached to that presence. Why does this matter so much? Because in Catholic theology, graces offered are not the same as graces received. God offers you infinite graces at every Mass. But if you don't consciously receive them, if you don't acknowledge them, if you don't claim them through an act of your will, many of those graces remain unopened gifts. It's like someone handing you a check for $1 million and you never bothering to deposit it. The offer was real. The gift was genuine. But your failure to act means you never benefit from what was freely given. Padre Pio knew this. His act of thanksgiving wasn't about making God feel appreciated. It was about opening his soul fully to receive what God was pouring out in that moment. He documented this in a letter to his spiritual director in 1915. After Mass, I remain before the Lord, not to speak, but to receive. In those moments, he fills what my unworthiness would otherwise leave empty. I must claim what he offers, or the enemy will steal what I neglect. Now here's how this applies to you. You're not a priest. You didn't consecrate the Eucharist, but you received the exact same Jesus that Padre Pio received. When you walk back to your pew after communion, that's your moment. That's when you need to do what Padre Pio did. Instead of immediately kneeling and racing through a memorized prayer, or worse, standing there looking around at other people, you need to stop. Close your eyes, and consciously, deliberately, with focused intention, claim the graces present in that moment. Here's exactly what this looks like in practice. You return to your pew, you kneel, and before you say a single word of prayer, you make an interior act of will. You say something like this in your mind: Lord Jesus, you are physically present within me right now. I claim every grace you died to give me. I open my soul completely to receive what you're offering in this moment. I accept your healing, your strength, your wisdom, your protection. I refuse to waste a single grace. Fill what my sins would leave empty. That's it. 30 seconds. But those 30 seconds shift you from passive Mass attendance to active grace reception. And here's what you'll notice when you start doing this. There will be resistance. The moment you close your eyes and try to focus, your mind will flood with distractions. You'll suddenly remember 17 things you need to do this week. You'll notice the person coughing 3 rows behind you. Your phone will buzz in your pocket. This resistance isn't random. This is spiritual opposition to what you're doing. because the enemy knows that if you actually claim and receive the graces available in that moment, you become spiritually dangerous to his plans for your life. Padre Pio experienced this resistance at levels you and I can barely imagine. Demons would physically manifest to distract him. They would create loud noises in the sacristy. They would cause physical pain to interrupt his focus. But he never allowed the distraction to prevent the practice. Some mornings it took him longer than others. Some mornings the battle was harder. But he always completed this act of thanksgiving and grace-claiming before moving to his second practice. Now, what happened when he couldn't do this? There are documented accounts from his later years when physical weakness or emergency situations forced him to abbreviate his post-Mass routine. On those rare days, fellow priests noticed immediate differences. His patience was shorter in the confessional. His spiritual discernment seemed less acute. The supernatural knowledge he typically operated with seemed clouded, not because God withdrew his grace, but because Padre Pio hadn't properly received and activated what was offered. The grace was there. He just hadn't fully opened himself to it. This is your first post-Mass practice starting this Sunday. Before you pray the rosary, before you read a devotional, before you do anything else, you claim the graces. 30 seconds of focused, intentional, willful reception of what Jesus is offering you in that moment. You do this every single Sunday without exception, and you protect those 30 seconds like your spiritual life depends on it, because it does. While other priests moved on with their day, Padre Pio stayed in direct communion with the presence he had just held in his consecrated hands, and what happened during this sacred conversation explains why his spiritual life had power that seems impossible to modern Catholics. After his initial act of thanksgiving and grace-claiming, which was silent and interior, Padre Pio would begin what he called his colloquy with the Beloved. This wasn't formal prayer. This wasn't reciting anything from a book. This was intimate, personal, conversational communion with Jesus still sacramentally present within him. You need to understand something about the Eucharistic presence. When you receive communion, the real presence of Christ remains in its full sacramental form for approximately 15 to 20 minutes, the time it takes for the consecrated host to be fully digested. During those minutes, Jesus is not symbolically or spiritually with you. He is substantially, physically, truly present within your body in the exact same way he was present in Mary's womb. This is defined Catholic doctrine from the Council of Trent. Your body is a walking tabernacle. Padre Pio grasped this reality at a depth most Catholics never reach. So after his act of thanksgiving, after claiming the graces, he would spend another 5 to 10 minutes in direct conversation with the Jesus dwelling within him. His fellow Capuchins documented that he would sometimes whisper during this time, not prayers from a book, not memorized formulas, personal, specific, intimate conversation. Lord, the soul coming to confession this morning needs your healing in this specific area. Jesus, I'm struggling with this temptation, and I need your strength right now while you're this close. Beloved, show me what you want me to understand about this situation. Why does this matter for you? Because you have access to this exact same intimacy, and you're probably wasting it. Most Catholics receive communion, kneel for 90 seconds, say a quick, "Thank you, Jesus," and then they're mentally done. They spend the rest of Mass planning their afternoon, or judging the cantor's song choices, or wondering why the homily was so short. Meanwhile, Jesus Christ, the second person of the Trinity, the creator of galaxies, is physically present inside their chest cavity, and they're not talking to him. Here's what Padre Pio wrote about this practice in his spiritual journal in 1918. Why do souls treat the Lord as a stranger when he has made himself an intimate guest? After communion, speak to him as you would to your dearest friend who has traveled far to visit you. Tell him everything, hide nothing, ask everything. These moments of his real presence are given precisely for this conversation. Do not waste them in silence born of distraction rather than reverence. So here's your second practice. After your 30-second grace-claiming prayer, you talk. Not formal prayer language, not thee and thou, and carefully constructed theological statements. You talk to Jesus like he's right there, because he is. You tell him what's actually happening in your life. Jesus, my marriage is struggling, and I don't know what to do. Lord, I'm scared about this medical diagnosis. I'm angry at this person, and I can't seem to forgive them. I don't feel your presence most of the time, and I don't know why. Real words, honest conversation, specific details. And then, and this is critical, you wait for response. Not audible words necessarily, but impressions. Thoughts that arise that don't feel like your usual mental chatter. A sudden sense of peace about something that was troubling you. A clarity about a decision you need to make. An awareness of a sin you've been blind to. This is how Jesus typically responds to your conversation. Through interior movements of grace that shift your understanding, your emotions, your will. Padre Pio experienced this at supernatural levels. He would sometimes receive explicit locutions, Jesus speaking directly to his mind in clear sentences. But he taught his spiritual children that even ordinary Catholics receive responses during post-communion prayer if they're paying attention. The problem is, you're not paying attention. You speak for 10 seconds, and then your mind wanders, and you miss the very response you asked for. Here's how to do this practically. Set a timer on your phone before Mass for 10 minutes. Put your phone on silent, but keep it in your pocket. After communion, after your grace-claiming prayer, start your conversation with Jesus and don't stop until that timer vibrates. 10 minutes, every Sunday. You talk, you listen, you talk, you listen. Back and forth, personal, specific, honest, even if it feels awkward at first, even if you're not sure you're hearing anything in response. You stay in that conversation for the full 10 minutes while the real presence is still fully operative within you. What you'll discover, and this is what Padre Pio promised, is that this 10-minute conversation will give you more spiritual clarity, more actual grace for daily life, more real growth in holiness than hours of distracted rosaries or rushed morning prayers. Why? Because you're communing with Jesus during the exact window when he's most accessible to you. You're having the conversation while he's literally inside your body. The intimacy available in those moments doesn't exist at any other point in your week. And here's what happened to Padre Pio on the rare occasions when he had to abbreviate this practice. Fellow priests noticed that he seemed more heavily burdened by the confessions he heard that day. The spiritual weights he normally carried with supernatural assistance seemed to drag on him more. Not because God was punishing him for a shortened prayer time, but because he hadn't fully downloaded the grace and strength he needed for the day's spiritual battles. He hadn't had the conversation that would equip him for what was coming. Your second practice starting this Sunday, 10 minutes of personal conversation with Jesus while he's physically present within you. Set the timer, protect the time. Talk honestly. Listen carefully. This practice alone will transform your relationship with the Eucharist from a ritual you complete to an encounter that changes you. Padre Pio understood something about spiritual warfare that most Catholics miss entirely. There's a specific 15-minute window after receiving communion when your prayers carry exponential power, and he used that window to deploy the most effective weapon in the Catholic arsenal. After his act of thanksgiving and after his personal colloquy with Jesus, while still in that post-communion state of grace, Padre Pio would pray a full rosary, not later in the day, not at his normal scheduled time, right there, immediately, while Jesus was still substantially present within him. Now you might be thinking, a full rosary takes 20 minutes. How does that fit in a 15-minute window? It doesn't. But Padre Pio would begin the rosary during that window and continue it as the sacramental presence diminished. The critical element was starting the rosary while the real presence was at full strength. because the prayers you offer during those minutes carry a spiritual weight and power that the same prayers don't carry 2 hours later. Here's the theology behind this. When you pray while in a state of grace, your prayers are heard by God. That's basic Catholic teaching. But when you pray while the Eucharistic presence is still substantially operative within you, your prayers are offered not just as your own, but in union with Jesus present in the Eucharist. You're not praying alone. You're praying with the Son of God physically joined to your soul. It's like the difference between sending an email yourself versus having the CEO of the company CC'd on the email with you. Same message, but the authority and power behind it is completely different. Padre Pio explained this in his spiritual direction to a priest in 1922. When you pray the Rosary after communion, the Blessed Mother hears not only your voice, but the voice of her Son speaking through you. Your petitions carry his authority. Your intercessions carry his merit. The demons flee not from your personal holiness, but from the presence praying within you. This is why the post-communion Rosary devastates hell's plans like no other time of prayer. Now here's where most Catholics make a critical mistake with the Rosary. They pray it mechanically. Lips moving, beads clicking, mind wandering to 1,000 different things. They race through it trying to finish quickly. They pray it while driving, while cooking dinner, while scrolling their phone. And then they wonder why the Rosary doesn't seem to have the power everyone talks about. The Rosary is the most powerful spiritual weapon we have, but only when it's prayed correctly. And Padre Pio's post-Mass Rosary practice reveals exactly what correctly means. First, he prayed it slowly, not rushed, not racing to finish. Each Hail Mary took 10 to 15 seconds. Why? Because he was meditating on the mysteries while praying. His mind wasn't wandering to random thoughts. He was contemplating the actual events of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection while his lips formed the words. The vocal prayer and the mental meditation were synchronized. This is how the Rosary was designed to be prayed, but almost nobody prays it this way anymore. Second, he prayed it with specific intention. Before starting each decade, Padre Pio would briefly state the intention for those prayers. For the soul who will come to confession today, struggling with this sin. For the conversion of this specific person. For protection against the demon attacking me in this particular way. The Rosary wasn't a vague, please bless everyone prayer. It was a targeted spiritual weapon aimed at specific needs. Third, he prayed it with awareness of the real presence still within him. With each Hail Mary, he maintained consciousness that Jesus was present as he prayed. This kept the prayer from becoming mechanical. You can't pray mechanically when you're aware that God is literally inside your chest as you speak. That awareness transforms every word from formula into conversation. Here's what this looks like for you practically. After your grace-claiming prayer, and after your 10-minute conversation with Jesus, you start the Rosary. You're still kneeling in your pew. Mass is over, but you stay. You take out your Rosary, and before you begin, you set the intention. Lord, I'm praying this Rosary for my spouse who's struggling with faith. Or, I'm praying for my own healing from this addiction. Or, I'm praying for protection for my children. Specific, clear, focused. Then you begin, slowly. You meditate on the first mystery. If it's the joyful mysteries, and you're on the Annunciation, you picture Mary receiving the angel's message. You think about her yes to God's plan, even when it didn't make sense. You consider how God is asking you to say yes to something in your life right now, and while you're contemplating this, your lips pray the Our Father and the Hail Marys, not rushed, not mechanical, synchronized meditation and vocal prayer. You maintain awareness that Jesus is present within you as you pray. With each Hail Mary, you remember, The Jesus I'm asking Mary to pray to is physically inside me right now. I'm not praying alone. I'm praying with him present. That awareness keeps you focused. It keeps the prayer from degrading into mindless repetition. Now here's the reality. You probably won't finish a full rosary before you need to leave the church. And that's fine. Padre Pio as a priest had more time available immediately after Mass than you do as a lay Catholic. But you can start the rosary during that post-communion window. You can pray 1 decade, maybe 2, while still at church. And then you continue the rosary in your car, at home, wherever. But you've started it during the window of maximum spiritual power. You've launched the prayer when it carries the most authority. What happens when you do this? Padre Pio taught that the rosary prayed during post-communion has 3 specific effects. First, it locks in the graces you received, the graces you claimed in your initial thanksgiving prayer, the strength you received in your conversation with Jesus. The rosary seals those graces into your soul so they can't be stolen by distraction or sin throughout the week. It's like putting a protective coating over fresh paint. The paint is there, but without the coating, it can be damaged before it fully sets. Second, it creates spiritual momentum for the week ahead. When you start your week with a powerful rosary prayed in union with the Eucharistic presence, you're setting a spiritual trajectory. The demons that might have attacked you on Tuesday now have to contend with the graces still operative from Sunday's prayer. You've created a spiritual shield that extends beyond the moment of prayer itself. Third, it trains your soul to recognize the difference between mechanical prayer and true prayer. Once you experience what the rosary feels like when prayed with focus, intention, and awareness of God's presence, you can't go back to mindless bead clicking. Your soul knows the difference now, and that knowledge elevates all your future prayer, not just your post-communion rosary. There were documented occasions when Padre Pio had to skip his post-Mass rosary due to emergency sick calls or other urgent priestly duties. And on those days, without exception, he reported feeling more vulnerable to demonic attack. Not immediately, but later in the day. The protection that the post-communion rosary provided wasn't just spiritual theory. It was measurable, practical, experiential protection that he noticed its absence when circumstances prevented the practice. This is your 3rd post-Mass practice starting this Sunday. After grace claiming, after personal conversation with Jesus, you begin the rosary. Slowly, with clear intention, with meditation on the mysteries, with awareness of the presence praying within you. Even if you only complete 1 decade before leaving church, you've started it during the window of power, and you continue it later, carrying that initial grace momentum through to completion. Now here's where everything you've just learned could be completely cancelled out. You can claim graces correctly, you can have a beautiful conversation with Jesus, you can start a powerful rosary, and still lose everything in the 15 minutes after Mass if you make any of these 3 critical mistakes. Padre Pio was explicit about these errors because he watched countless Catholics commit them week after week, wondering why they felt spiritually dry despite regular Mass attendance. The first mistake: immediately engaging in unnecessary conversation as you leave church. You receive communion, you kneel for 60 seconds, and then Mass ends, and you immediately turn to the person next to you to chat about the weather, the homily, the parish announcements, whatever. Or worse, you walk out to your car and immediately call someone on your phone. Every word you speak, every conversation you engage in, pulls your attention away from the interior presence you're supposed to be communing with. Padre Pio was famous for his silence after Mass. People would try to greet him, ask him questions, request his blessing, and he would hold up one finger in a wait gesture and keep walking to his cell. He wasn't being rude. He was protecting the post-communion window. He understood that human conversation, no matter how innocent or well-intentioned, fragments your attention and interrupts the grace flow happening in those critical minutes. Here's what you need to do. When Mass ends, don't talk to anyone unless absolutely necessary. Not the chatty person next to you, Not your friend who wants to make lunch plans. Not your family members who want to discuss where you're eating. You smile, you nod, you keep walking. You get to your car in silence. You drive home in silence. Or if you can't avoid conversation, you keep it to absolute bare minimum and return to interior silence as quickly as possible. Those post-communion minutes are too precious to waste on discussing the weather. The second mistake: engaging with media immediately after Mass. You get in your car and turn on the radio. You pull out your phone and check social media. You start scrolling emails or text messages, and with each notification, each song, each headline, your soul's attention shifts from the sacred to the secular. You're yanking yourself out of communion with Jesus to commune with the noise of the world instead. This isn't about media being evil. This is about timing. There are 23.5 hours every day when you can check your phone. The half hour after communion isn't one of them. Padre Pio lived before smartphones and social media, but the principle was the same. He refused to read mail, review schedules, or engage with any non-essential information for at least 30 minutes after Mass. His fellow priests knew not to bring him administrative matters during that window. The principle was simple. Nothing external should be allowed to interrupt the interior work happening in the post-communion period. What you do instead? Silence. You leave Mass, you get in your car, you drive home in complete silence. No radio, no phone, no podcasts, just you and the Jesus dwelling within you. If you need to drive your family home, fine. But you minimize conversation and you don't engage with entertainment. You protect the silence, because silence is where you can actually hear the interior movements of grace that Jesus is trying to communicate. The third mistake, and this is the most common one, rushing immediately into activity after Mass. You get home from church, and within 5 minutes you're cooking breakfast, doing laundry, watching television, working on projects. You move straight from the sacred space of Mass into the frantic energy of weekend productivity, and in doing so, you're jerking your soul out of receptive mode and into productive mode before the graces have time to settle into your being. Padre Pio would spend at least 30 minutes in complete stillness after returning to his cell post-Mass. Not sleeping, not working, not even reading, just sitting quietly, allowing the graces received to penetrate deeply into his soul without interruption. He compared it to letting medicine fully enter your bloodstream before jumping up and running around. The medicine is effective, but only if you give it time to work. Is what this means for you. When you get home from Mass, before you do anything else, you sit down somewhere quiet for at least 15 minutes. You don't immediately start your Sunday routine. You don't turn on the television. You don't begin cooking. You sit. You remain in the interior space you've been cultivating since communion. You let the graces settle. You stay with Jesus in the silence. Maybe you finish your rosary that you started at church. Maybe you just sit in quiet awareness of His presence. But you don't rush into activity. Your family might not understand this at first. They might wonder why you're sitting quietly instead of helping with breakfast or getting ready for afternoon plans. You explain to them, gently but firmly, I need 15 minutes of quiet after Mass. This is my time with Jesus. Please respect it. And you protect that time the same way you'd protect a doctor's appointment or a work commitment. Because this is more important than either of those things. When Padre Pio saw Catholics violate these three principles, conversation, media, immediate activity, he would sometimes confront them directly. There's a documented account of him stopping a man who was loudly discussing business deals in the church parking lot right after Mass.